So, hello, everyone, and welcome to Sage Advice. I am Rivka Rivera, your host. And today we have a very special guest, Davi Santos. Davi is a Brazilian American actor raised in New York City. He attended Professional Performing Arts Middle School and LaGuardia Performing Arts High School before receiving a Bachelor's of Science magna cum laude in the cross-disciplinary major of cognitive philosophy from the Macaulay Honors College at City University of New York. An ABC sitcom brought him to Los Angeles, where he continued to make guest appearances until he played the title role in the international franchise, The Power Rangers. Since then, he's collaborated with Densely Hollow Films on a series of short and feature-length films and screenplays, recognized at the Cannes Film Festival, Academy Nicholl Fellowship, Cinequest, and The Blacklist. Wow. He starred in the CBS original television series by horror icon Kevin Williamson in Tell Me a Story, and then the network's first series since the industry's pandemic closure, Good Sam. Davi resides in Los Angeles and New York City. So welcome, Davi.
Thank you, Rivka. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It is such a pleasure. And full disclosure, Davi and I both went to LaGuardia, and we've
We
had the
did.
pleasure of acting together a few times. So
hmm
it's so nice to be able to share this space with you and ask you, learn more about your journey. Were you born in New York City?
No, I was actually born in Rio, but my parents brought me before my first birthday, so I was raised in Astoria, Queens.
Let's start there. I'm always really curious how the places that we were raised have influenced our journey as artists. And for
Mm.
you, you also went to two performing arts. You got to go to a performing arts middle school and high school. How did that influence your journey and where you are today?
I mean, starting with Astoria, it's the landscape. It's kind of this like old timey New York vibe. I feel like there's certain neighborhoods that maintain a certain feel of how New York used to be before explosions of skyscrapers and like development. So it gave me a real appreciation for the city and the culture. It's surrounded by people from different places and countries, but I don't know. I feel like I owe an ode to Astoria and the bridges, the buildings. There's something very specific about it and lovely. So then transitioning to PPAS and going to middle school instead of like some like local kids, it became more about the arts, very art centric, and expanded my network beyond just like the Brazilian Americans I might have grown up with, or like the Italian, Polish families or Greek families that I went to school with, into now like these guys who had been around, I mean, familially in the city for so long, and now are studying the arts or performing professionally, which I didn't even know was I mean, we all see like movies and shows with kids in them, but it isn't until you're working with them as a child that you're like, wow, this is actually possible.
And for people who are not from New York, will you explain that? Because, I think most people, it's pretty unique to New York that you would travel the way we did to get to a
Mm,
school. So
mhm.
just maybe just a little geography of like the Astoria versus just so
Yeah,
people
yeah.
understand that journey, because I think it's
Mm.
very cool to commit in that
For
way.
sure. Yeah, no, I was just like looking if I happen to have like a map that I can just like yoink. But it's basically like if New York is here, we'll just pull out like we have some Herman Hesse. Okay, so if New York
I
if
can edit
Manhattan.
one in too. I'll edit one
Oh
under.
yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
edit
edit
one
one in.
here. You can point and I'll edit it.
Okay, great. Yeah. So let's say like if this was Manhattan, if like Manhattan is over here, then Long Island, aka Queens, and Brooklyn are right there. So it's like Astoria is like, oh yeah, I can just walk to school. It's a zone school. Then going to the city requires just like taking the train, and then you go into like town, right? Into the city. Which I guess like for us it was no big deal. It was like it became part of the normal thing. But I mean, looking back, it's kind of nuts. It's like, yeah, as a 12-year-old, it's like it's time to go to school, and you just go to the train. And I, actually I just really recently started to really understand that we were like island hoppers, essentially. Like if you live in Queens, you
Yeah.
live in Brooklyn, you go to school in Manhattan, like you're never really on continental America. So it's like this cool, like you're always traveling. It always felt like no matter, like your whole career is about expansion and change and world building and world shifting. So even your day to day on this micro intimate level was the same way.
I love that. That's such a fun way to look at it. We're island hoppers.
Isn't that bizarre? Yeah,
And so
literally.
you knew you had a calling quite early on then to follow the arts, or was it, or did you, I don't know, don't let me assume, did you
Mhm.
know that you had this artistic craving before going, or was it something that was inspired just by going to school there?
No, I was lucky to have had an arts program in my elementary school, the magnet school. I really hope they still exist. Everything indicates that the board of ed and the city like has scrapped so many arts programs from schools, and they're so essential because that's where kids really learn. They have an aptitude for whether it's playing an instrument or singing or dancing or anything. So we had a little play, and
I wonder why so hurry.
My grandmother's house.
And what might be in your basket?
Bread and wine, so grandmother will have something good to make her strong.
Where might your grandmother live?
Further in the woods, her house stands under 3 large oak trees.
I loved it, and my parents saw that it really like lit me up, and so we stumbled upon this information that there was this performing arts school that you could just do a monologue and a song to get in, and I had to learn a monologue over the weekend. Like I
Do you
went to a live.
remember? Do you
It
remember what it
was
was?
it literally came from like a monologue book that I went to a Barnes and Noble. My dad took me to a Barnes and Noble, went to like the performing arts section, found a monologue book. I picked one that was like about a kid who needed to who was like happy to escape the bars of confinement and sound like he was in jail. And at the end, he's like, "And I'm glad I got my braces off." You know,
I bet that's actually that's
it was good.
brilliant. What a
It was
brilliant
great.
conceit. Maybe that's
Yeah.
your next one-man show.
That's yes, I'll expand upon that story and then build it like a feature and then make a VR simulation of like the experience itself. But yeah, and then that's what got me in. And then from there it was like Monday, I was no longer in like the New York like local experience, and then sort of expanded into the city. And then so it's like, yeah, I'm from Astoria, but I always felt like Midtown was so close to my upbringing too, because that's where every day was, and that's where we went to movies on Fridays or like went to sleepovers
Yeah.
and growing up.
Yeah, totally. And so what was your journey like from moving from high school, doing your performing arts, and then from college and then into your professional life? I always think that's a really interesting
Mm.
time for an artist. I don't know about you, but I felt like, especially
Mhm.
going to performing arts high school, I had a lot of like, I know what I want to do, like a lot of angst
Mhm.
to just get out and do it. But going to college for me, at least, was a really crucial
Sure.
moment of pause. So I
Yes.
wonder for you what, and I know you didn't study theater in college, so I'm curious about that part of your journey.
Yeah. I guess because of the middle school aspect and being so aware and jelly in a good way. I was so like excited and inspired by my peers, especially the ones that were on like leaving school early on Wednesdays to go to be on Broadway, or that was going or like missing 2 months of school because they were doing pilot season in January or February. So I always had this sense, even at like 12, 13, 14, that I shouldn't be waiting until I finish a program, or I shouldn't be waiting until after high school or after college to start. I always felt like I was 4 or 5 or 8 years behind everyone else. So with that mindset, I kind of self-educated myself with a little help of my peers. But there's also so much literature on it. So I was like, my dad was big on like Barnes and Noble at the time, right? The monologue book. And so he would take me back and I would read these books on like how to get an agent and how to do all these things. And so I got myself my first rep when I was, I think, a freshman in high school. And then it was like this classic trajectory that you kind of read about in terms of like, oh, you start doing commercials, right? You do your first commercial, you're like the lead in the commercial, and that's great, and it's national, and you're making your first sum of money doing like 3 lines or whatever. And then meanwhile you also do like commercial print, and you're like, okay, great, you're in front of the camera, you're getting all this experience. So by mid high school, I kind of had like a flow, at least, of like doing a lot of free theater, underground free theater in like the village, and experimental work and docu theater. But what's great is that you're always working with people that are so serious about the craft. It doesn't matter that, and honestly, like, we need to talk about this on another, like on a podcast or something, but like Broadway needs
Hmm.
to honor their performers so much more, and off Broadway as
Hmm.
well, in terms
Hmm.
of salaries and making sure that they can live and sustain themselves in New York in a healthy way. But
Yes.
anyway, so that's all to say that it was this industry commercial as well as like theatrical upbringing And so by the time I got to 18, I knew that I didn't want to do a conservatory because I was afraid that I would have to lose all my representation that I was already building, the commercial agent, the first legit agent, the first, and wanting to build steam. So honestly, I applied to one school, and that was the one school that would allow me to create my own major, that would pay me to go to school. And that was like a good program, and it was competitive. So Macaulay Honors, which is also just down the street from LaGuardia,
it is
on Central Park West.
Yeah.
Because they're basically trying to, yes.
And how did what you studied there influence your work as an actor?
It's heady. It's on the heady and cerebral, but you know what? It's also about being able to conceive of human nature, human psychology, narrative, story, philosophy, and aspects of reality that go into every single script that you ever read, or every single film that you ever watch, or every single conversation that you ever have with a person about their background. So very often when someone asks, like, oh, what did you study? And I tell them, yeah, it was like a cross-disciplinary study on cognitive psych and philosophy of consciousness. They're like, well, how are you applying that? Anyway, it's like,
you're like, I'm an actor.
I'm an actor, number one. Number two, it's like you apply that every single day. It gives you at least the opportunity for a deeper understanding for the human condition that I think we should always revisit in order to be able to get to the area of significance and humanity that bonds all of us.
Absolutely. And you're telling stories not only as an actor, and we'll talk more about your trajectory as an actor, but also as a filmmaker, as a writer. You wear a lot of hats, and I'm curious, and you have discussed you do film and TV, you go back and forth between Los Angeles and New York. Do you have a preference for any form of storytelling that you do?
For the longest time, I would say that the preference was just the story itself. The integrity of the story itself is what I loved. But I think, specifically speaking, even though we might be in this golden age of television where there's so many things available to us, like we can find those shows that suit us, they're like custom made, tailor fit. Yeah. However, there's something to be said about long term, like the long narrative as opposed to short narrative, aka like a movie, the 2-hour film format versus the 14-hour film format of like a television show, right? Especially those that are not written all at once. They're written like bit as they go on.
Yeah.
In terms of the integrity of the story, there's something to be said about being able to flesh out a full picture and to be able to then conceive of it and then make it concise and make it intentful and significant and poetic that you could lose when you're building it little by little. It's so much more challenging. And so I take off my hat for those successful stories that have done that. So that being said, I prefer film. I prefer theater. There's TV shows that are so good. It's just so challenging to find those kinds of shows. I also veer away from being committed to like 5 seasons for anything because I feel like there's so many stories. So so that's like a little bit on like, yeah, definitely film and TV. And film, movies, TV. However, it all comes down to who you're working with, because that totally shapes your everyday and what the story is. Because if you're excited with that script and you give yourself so much more, you see yourself, you get goosebumps, you connect with your everyday life and those others, and it makes it an opportunity to give so much more. So it's always story first, regardless of the format.
Beautiful. I love integrity of the story. And what excites you currently when you're looking at a story at this moment? I know that's a big question, but maybe just at this moment in your life, is there something that's sort of jumping off the page at you?
Yeah, actually, yes, because it's a big question in terms of there's so many ways to get excited in a story, right? It could be because like the story is well written in a way that you fall in love with the characters, but then there's so much at stake, and so now you're rooting for them. Or it could just be because of the genre that is exciting, right? Is it a space odyssey, or are you in a Victorian sort of haunted sort of experience? There's so many worlds, right? So like that aside, I really do appreciate when we have stories that mirror the socio-political reality that we have in an interesting, esoteric way, in a way that's accessible for the audience to sort of get excited about these stories. A lot of people say like the one not to go into politics at all, but like one positive trait about the last presidency was that so many people that were so numb or just tuned out from the political like the political world suddenly were tuned in and realized that they mattered. So reading those stories that craft even little bits of it, whether it's about I've read one recently that was about the journalists who follow individual senators or congressmen during their election campaigns. It's a hyper specific moment in the whole political strata with very specific people. However, it echoes a sort of overall understanding of what goes on in politics, the house of cards of the world, and so forth.
Yeah.
So those excite me because I feel like those can make a difference, and stories that make a difference go beyond just, oh my god, that was so entertaining, or oh my god, I felt so much, I'm so alive, which are all great feelings. But to be able to be slightly educated or inspired to learn more about something, I find so wonderful, because then you get like all these birds with one stone.
I love that. Similar. You articulated something really important. And I think you're right. It's a big question because, of course, as actors, we want to be I get overwhelmed by, I'm like, but I want to have every lived experience ever. And you're like, that's why you're an actor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But knowing that there's probably, especially, you're still very early in your career. It's like those things it's always fascinating to see for an artist where they shift and where they're at, depending on that moment and stage in life and what's driving them towards that particular storytelling. And I think being in alignment with that is really important. And being able to articulate it as you just did seems to be really important.
Yeah. It goes to specificity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That makes great storytelling, specificity.
Yeah.
So along the lines of inspiration, who are some of the artists that inspire you?
Man, I mean, that also changes through time. They're like growing up on like Jim Carrey and Robin Williams movies, and really, and like Pierce Brosnan and James Bond, like these different genres of like the comedy, the action, and so many animated movies. But like recently, actually, because that, I feel like that question is one of those that really does define like styles that like we are able to articulate. There's a strength in being able to articulate like that style or that kind of performance or those roles or that kind of actor. It allows us, I think, to see and be able to build upon that as a result of being able to articulate it. So for the longest time, I thought it was like so like whimsical to just choose an artist that we like, especially when we like so many. But on the other hand, there is something to be said about the strength in being able to concretize that, right? So that being said, I think recently I was just like stunned at how I hadn't had the repertoire bestowed upon me of Viola Davis. Like I saw Woman King recently and watched her afterwards talking about the film, and it's talk about those artists or those stories that can kind of cover so much ground, right? Everything from entertainment to the psychology of in this case, like whether it's the woman or the warrior, as well as like being Black or being a minority, or all of these different areas, and then a power struggle and power dynamic. And like, yeah, we're talking about like this alternate history for slavery, but we're also talking about really our lives today with each other. So I thought that she's so powerful and so specific as well. And so I just think like her as a performer is incredible, then what she's doing as well as an artist and as a human is incredible. Her and Tilda Swinton, I think, and Tilda in just her ability to shapeshift, which is that other part that we love, right, about performances and actors. It's like every time you see her, she's a completely different human. And Once Upon a Time, Nicole Kidman too. But I mean, I feel like she turned things are there's kind of funny with Nicole, but like growing up with like her artistry as well, I thought was so defining. And then on the men's side, it would be like the strength and depth of like a Joaquin Phoenix, who I feel like is always like the entity, like he's never like playing at something, it always feels like this anchor that just falls endlessly in terms of like the root, how rooted he is with his work and as characters. But yeah, I'm all over the map. I wish I could give more men right now, but as of late I was like watching 3,000 Years of Longing with Tilda and Idris, and I was like, yes, she's one of my favorites, with that question in the back, like who's, and then watching Viola is like, yes, I'm gonna definitely watch Viola, and then Joaquin always. But there's others, there's so many others. Yeah, it's just like going between like what time period, of
what
life.
time period. And I loved how you said, it's true, we have there's certain different, because and I asked the question, but it is also a question that you're like, how do I ask this better? And I'm
Mm,
learning from this conversation of when you say,
mm,
what are you getting at behind like a favorite, but it's more concrete, right? It's like what inspires. I like that you said strength. Like who's
mhm,
um someone that inspires strength, but also then there's people who like inspire poetry in us or inspire that sort
mm,
of that writing, that desire to create, or that desire to see a worldview in a particular way. So you
mm,
inspired me to think more specifically about also what that question is getting at.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that would lead to like the directors, like the world builders that you know, remember like Eternal Sunshine or Schenectady, New York, like the Charlie
Hmm.
Kaufmans and the Spike Joneses of the world that don't just tell stories but are able to like bend them and fold them and present them. You know, the movies that are like about movies and stories that are about stories, because that feels
Yeah.
like that's what our lives are. Literally, you know, we're like in our own narrative as humans, but then we're like watching the narrative of like civilization and society, like you know, moving, and we
Yeah.
either have feelings like, oh, it's a car crash slowly happening, or like,
Yeah.
no, it's an endless possibility, it's a sun that's actually rising, you know, or is it like good versus evil? There's all these different points of view that we have of like what narrative that we're in, both in our minds as well as like in our world, that is then
Absolutely.
reflected in front of us in a dark room on screen.
Yeah. No, I think we're probably both on the same page that it's a spiritual experience in some ways, however
Mm,
you're taking in that narrative, or at least it aims to be.
yes,
Even if you try
yes.
and deny it and you're on multiple screens at once, taking it in as like a Charlie Kaufman would probably never intended, or who knows the intent. I mean,
Mm,
but I think we're getting that narrative no matter what. And to be able to be conscious of that,
mm.
at least has been useful to me, that I'm like, oh, even if I'm distracted, even if I'm multitasking narratives, they're all
Yeah,
narratives.
yeah, which we have to do, you know, as we plug in different rooms and we see different circles of people in our professions, you know, and like the life you have on set versus the life you have with talking to your representative about like the next step, and talking to your lawyer,
Hmm.
then seeing your mom, and then seeing your friend, and then going to vote, and that like they're vastly different worlds, and yet they're all fundamentally connected, and you are the through line, you are
Yes.
the ultimate audience and creator all at the same time.
Yes. So I'm curious about your work with Densely Hollows and
Yeah.
how you got involved in that, and that where that sort of came up for you in your journey.
Hmm. So I met Christopher James Lopez as a fellow actor as well, and he was transitioning into writing full time. But we had met, and then he had shown me this short that he really liked that he was working on, and I thought it was really cool. And I had certain ideas that I just offered, and he sort of took them, and then we kind of just went back and forth on the short and the crafting of it. And then he asked me if I wanted to do it with him, and we did. And he submitted it to Cannes, and then it was selected, and I was like, oh, amazing! We should probably do something else. So that amounted to several different shorts that I've had, and medium length films, which is a whole other ball game. You know, look, you make a short film or make a feature, don't make 45-minute movies. But but it was a great experience, and I love the piece, and we've grown, I think, as artists so much, because you start to, when you wear those different hats, you shape stories in different ways, and you start to see how they are created in different ways.
Mm,
um, you know, like you work as an actor, then you walk away, but then the editor is there and choosing what shot or how long to spend with the director on one shot, and that tells a very specific, it puts a spin on your performance. It's so different. And then you work with
mm,
the musician and learning whether or not you want to start the cue, like during the breath between him saying something and something else. Is it the thought that is about to, are you welcoming the thought with that music cue, or are you accenting the entire
mm.
speech with the track? Like there's all of these, you start to feel these layers, and you also start to consume differently as a result. So I loved, I've loved working with Chris on all these. And then of course our first feature with James Manos and Lauren Velez from Dexter and from Dexter fame and world. So working with
Hmm.
an intense showrunner who has his own way of creating and working, and then our sort of independent, we're
Did
getting our
Lauren
feet
go
wet.
to Did Lauren go to LaGuardia? I don't
Lauren,
know
to
why I
my
have.
knowledge, did not go to, but she's like a New York fixture. But I
She's
don't.
a New
No, no,
York
no. She went to a
fixture.
performing arts school. She did, and potentially for dance with her twin sister. But I don't think it was LaGuardia. I will look at. I feel like I would have definitely had known that, or at least
Right.
she would have brought it up. But yeah, but yeah, it was it's an adventure. And then when we're not like making the movie, then we're like finessing one, like
So you're always at work on something.
yes. And sometimes, yes, I'll take on a movie, or like right now, Christopher is working on developing a studio in the Dominican Republic with a group of
Wow.
partners. Yeah. And so sometimes we'll take a pause if like something has reached a certain level, then we'll, work on our projects, then we'll return, either to pick something up or to introduce something else to just compete with our attention. But that's I think something for the long haul.
That's beautiful. I have many questions that I want to ask about that kind of working relationship, but it might envelop into my next question, which is, at the foundation, we have a lot of actors who have just started. Maybe they're midway in their careers. Maybe it's someone who's changing careers and they're discovering their love of this craft of actors and directors and writers. What would your advice be to someone who's just starting out in the creative arts industry? And that can be whatever you feel moved to share today. It could be spiritual advice, practical advice, anything that you are resonating towards today.
Okay. So in a very simplified way, as holistic as we can be and fully comprehensive, we think of ourselves as artists and industrialists, as like the world that's within us and then the world that we create, right? Or the world that's outside that we're consuming. So both of those have to consistently have flow. So it's like, what are we taking in from the world? So in other words, what are we consuming that's always inspiring us is number one. So like find inspiration, and also let's challenge ourselves to take in works that have been known to be these like masterpieces. Seek the masterpieces, seek the piece that wasn't actually well known from the master that you discover is like even better. We have to be proactive in that way. So consume intentfully, design your consumption as an artist, learn about our predecessors, the ones that have come before us, that have messages for us that can help us into the future, right? Because like the whole point of, I think, in any artist, yes, we want to just do as much as we can before our light goes out, but come on, like secretly everyone, or articulately everyone, wants the work to continue. But like, yes, even in the theater, that was like for that one moment with everyone, and then the curtain comes down. We want people to walk away empowered or feeling something that they take out and continue. So to be part of that by like taking some of that which has been already cast out towards us. So that's like the consumption. And then in the inside, we have to also develop and sharpen our pencils. And how do we do that? So it's like learning what are the different ways that we can grow. And once we learn the different ways that we can grow, well, then how do we want to take in as much of that as possible? So all of this comes back to design. It's like design what you take in, what you consume, and then design how we can grow. Be intentful in both ways. And if you're consuming intentfully and you're designing intentfully about your own growth, then it's going to be about what you actually express as an artist, and it'll be filled. It'll be whole.
Wow. This is a whole ecosystem. I love this. Design.
Yeah.
Intently, consume intently. That's awesome. I had chills on that. Yes, totally. I really resonate with that because I remember a moment in I think often there can be an anxiety for young artists to do the right thing. And then eventually you learn there's no right thing, especially potentially. I do think there's probably certain careers where you're like, yes, you take this course and then this course and then this course. Like you're a doctor, you should take these classes. But for an artist, there's really no, and I just remember that anxiety of like, and there's certainly an industry trying to sell you the keys to the stuff.
Oh, yes.
But there's no key. It's, I think, a matter of exactly like knowing thyself and to thyself being true. And I think sometimes there can be a desire to be in a place that inspires you or move towards those things that are truly authentically inspiring, but perhaps you don't want to do that because you're afraid it might take you away from where you should quote unquote be or what you need to be quote unquote doing. And I don't know, the way you articulated that reminded me of a life lesson I've learned, which is that being true and authentic to that source of inspiration is the best thing you can do to feed your creative soul. and what you need, like the resource you need to be able to do the thing you want to do. Otherwise, I found it was like eating cardboard. If you're not in a place of true inspiration, it was just like you're not able to output what you need as an artist.
That's when it becomes the grind, the hustle.
What an awful metaphor, right?
Yeah. It's like words that I understand. Like, yes, we should always persevere, right? We should like have momentum and inertia, but like it shouldn't. It's to say that
antithetical to the creative spirit to grind.
It's a grind. It's like we're not machinery, right? And like the hustle too. It's like we're not scheming, but like you're hustling. It's like I get it, and God bless people who use those words that empower them. But there's just like there's another way that can be like an uplift, that when we're doing, like as you say, there's no right, but when we are listening to that, to the inspiration, or when we are listening to those like truths that exist out there, and that they're out there for us, right? We just have to work in order to be able to. It's like you have to fix your antenna so that you can listen to something in a way, and you can't just like, oh, turn on the TV and there's nothing on, so I'll turn it off. I'm talking about TVs from the 80s, I guess, not that I was there, but like you gotta like fix the antenna. You gotta, and then only then can we actually, and it's like working smarter instead of working harder. That's also like, I think the thing about the grind and the hustle. It's like, wait, let's take a step back.
I would actually say I liked your language more. It wouldn't even be working smarter. It'd be working with intended design or intently. I like intently because sometimes smarter, I don't know.
Like,
sometimes
what does that mean?
I'm like, what does that mean? Like,
what does it mean?
But intent feels like it's up to me. Like it can be whatever I want it to be as long as it's an intended direction.
Which is scary for a lot of people because they're like, well, what do I even intend? Well, it's like you want to perform, but why? And like who are you? So like learning about like the why, the question about who's your fave. Well, maybe I don't have a fave, but if you were to have a fave, who would it be and why? It's like it's our path into self-understanding, and people shy away. It's why people love the templates. You choose a major, then you're given 14 classes for that year or whatever, and it's like, oh good, the safety of having someone tell me what to do, because I've unfortunately been growing up in a system where I'm always told what to do, where to go, where to sit, how to stand, what to get 100%. The way to get 100% is to study and then have the right answer. But like, welcome to the other side, guys. This is where you have the liberty, like this freedom. And we're so afraid of it, but like we have to unshackle ourselves and then just see like how broad our wingspan actually is. It's scary, but it's terrifically exciting if we actually use the tools that are inherently in us.
Yeah, that's awesome. So my last question is, and it's inspired by what we've sort of been riffing on. In this past week, has there been a location or a moment or a place that you have found that that moment of feeding your artist soul, that moment of inspiration that you or also that you've maybe done some output? I don't know.
Gosh, you're talking about geography, right? Not like an event per se, but like
it could be an event. But I was thinking, just I guess because we started the talk with maps, maybe geography is on my mind.
Well, very good. It's literally, it's the twofold of like having just gone sailing today and seeing like the Hudson and the city from the side, right? And I'm always taking now the ferry on the east side, the East River ferry, to go from like one side of Long Island to the other side of like Manhattan, and then just seeing the city, and just gazing over the rails and seeing like the bridges come over, and you see every building is also a time period, right? Like when you focus on the Queensboro Bridge, right, the one famously shot in Batman and Spider-Man and had their own like big scenes, like the whole city turns into 1910. And so seeing and feeling that, you get to like hear like the city song from these different eras. So
or Long Island City, when you go to Long Island City, I was like, why does this, I had that a magical moment where I was like, this feels, especially being in New York, I was like, this is weird here, but like in a kind of cool magical way. And I was like, oh, it's because most of these buildings were built in like
4 years ago.
Yeah, literally, I looked at a building,
Yeah.
it's like 2021, and I was like,
Yeah.
what? Which
Yeah.
is so strange in a city like New York, because most of these, like you'll have new buildings, but they're often on top of or sitting next to something that's been there since the 1800s. So like that whole landscape. And it was such a subtle shift, but it is cool, I guess, talking about the inspiration of physical architecture and location. It was
Yeah.
cool to feel like magically in like a weird, I was like, I don't feel like I'm in New York. I like it.
Right. Because these are new buildings. Like it's not New York, but it is New York. Yeah.
And
That's
some
the
people
new,
might hate it, but I kind of liked it in the
yeah,
moment.
it is controversial. The new skyline that we have there.
Totally. I guess it
yeah.
kind of was like, well, I don't know the history of that location to speak at all on it.
It used to be
But-
like a Victorian park before before there was a subway. There was they were building the bridge, and it used to just be this like beautiful, so it looked like this sort of like French looking, big lawn, lots of fountains. And then they're like, we're going to build a bridge, and there's going to be a subway that goes to it, and also the city. So then they bulldozed this beautiful park, and then they built this very industrial sort of like street, and it became like Queens Plaza, which was like this netherland for a long time. And now they're like, well, and now this clock tower is going to have this gigantic, it's all just like Long Island City, like skyscrapers with like a beautiful view of the city. So now it's like reindustrialized. They built a park in the same place where the park was 100 years ago.
Wow,
yeah, but
fascinating.
around. Yeah.
It occurs to me too, I feel like other places don't have this, but as New Yorkers, when we were talking about it, how you were like, oh, we're little islands. I don't know if you get this, but I feel like as a New Yorker, you don't think about like it's like neighborhoods, but you're thinking about it based on trains and not like, so distance wise, it's all transit, and there's not like there's not that physical, like I'm telling you, grew up, born and raised. It was like yesterday that I finally made the connection between like, oh, this Astoria, like.
Yes. Oh, same but Brooklyn side.
Right.
Like, oh,
because
yeah.
you're like, no, it's actually like, if I was to be like, how do you get there? You'd be like
take the G to the L, and then you take the
you're
L
like
3
it's
stops.
like a
and
squiggly line, but no, it's so, I was like, oh, it's so close.
It's so close.
And
that's
if
why I
you're
love the ferry.
Yeah, like it shapes the ferry changed it all.
Yeah.
Even like, when you're doing an acting exercise, you're going through a script and you're like, which way's there, and you have a sense of reaching. Like if your character's a New Yorker, you better know they're gonna be like the subway. That's where they point. Oh, it's that way.
That's the way to everywhere. No, it's really nice being able to know like where everything is, and being able to like, you just feel the map so much more, staying above ground.
A lot of water. We aren't, and once it hits you that you're like, we are on islands.
We're on islands the entire time. We're on islands, and then part of it juts out into the ocean, but it's always, surrounded by that. It's so consolidated, which is why it's so rich, rich with experiences and haunted experiences, those that are passed before us, and the ones that cycle, that the same thought that you're having is probably someone who had that same thought in that same place, whether it was like 10 years before, or the 20 or 30 or 40 or 100 or 200 or 300. You don't have to go to Europe to get that kind of like that length, that duration.
Exactly.
But that's the place. Yeah. The Hell's Gate Bridge and the Triborough on the upper side of the East River. I feel like it's old New York, and it's old me as well.
Yeah. Well, this was such a great conversation. To wrap up, what is there any project you're working on now that you're particularly excited about, that you want to share anything about?
Well, I mean, I just came back to New York because of my exhibition, where I was, well, it's not my exhibition, I was just in it, David LaChapelle's exhibition at the Fotografiska on Park Avenue. It's 6 floors of like 3 decades of work, and I was very, very proud to be part of that exhibition. I'm at least on the 3rd floor. I didn't get to go through all of it, but yeah. And yeah, it was just like a full circle of like, of meeting at a gallery, and then like coming back to New York like a year and a half later, and just having like a piece like in this museum with this like, this art hero that I respect and find so much inspiration from. That's so incredible. Check out the exhibit if you're in New York. If you're in New York, check out the exhibit. Yeah, he's great. And then we'll see about October. I mean, until things actually are concretized, it's I think we all feel like, the great hush before, before things fall into place. But I'm terrifically excited.
Yes. Okay. Wonderful. Well, we'll see more from you for sure. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of the wonderful things you create. And thank you for sharing your sage advice with our audience. And
Thank
we'll
you,
link-
Rivka.
Yeah, we'll link to that gallery, and we'll link to where you can find out more about Davi.